Why was she the only one who noticed the silence between the gusts of wind? Sarah pressed her eye against the scope, her cheekbone resting against the cool steel, and exhaled as if the mountain itself might hear her. The valley stretched out below, scattered with shadows and movement too faint for the untrained eye. To her, though, it was alive with signs, branches bending against the wrong wind, a speck of reflection that wasn't stone, a hush where even the wildlife had withdrawn. It was supposed to be a routine watch, observation, report, endure, but the weight of responsibility pressed against her chest heavier than the rifle across her shoulders. General had told her. No, he had looked at her, held her eyes longer than protocol demanded, and said this ridge was the most critical piece of ground in the entire operation. Thousands of soldiers would sleep safely tonight only if her team kept their vigil. That thought should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like an anvil. She shifted her position slightly, every muscle aching from hours locked in the same pose. The air carried the bitter scent of pine and faint gunpowder residue from distant artillery tests days before. Even here, in the open vastness of the mountains, war clung like a ghost. Sarah had been through countless missions before. She had earned the respect of peers who once dismissed her as the quiet sharpshooter, a woman with steady hands, but they thought fragile resolve. They didn't say it out loud, not anymore. Her record had silenced them long ago, but still some shadows of doubt lingered in others' eyes, even In's, especially In's. This mission was different. She felt it. Something about the way the intelligence reports had shifted tone over the last week. The enemy wasn't just gathering, it was choreographing, moving in patterns that weren't random, and patterns always meant intent. Her team had been up here for 3 days, 8 specialists, 8 fragments of humanity stitched together to hold back a storm. With his radios, wiry, impatient, always fiddling with dials like a surgeon with nerves. William, the medic with explosives in his blood, a contradiction Sarah still hadn't fully understood. Jackson and reconnaissance ghosts who could vanish into enemy territory and come back with maps written in memory. And the rest, men hardened by years of service, each carrying their own ghosts, their own silent reasons for still being here. The general had handpicked them, but it was Sarah he had pulled aside after the final briefing. She could still hear the gravel in his voice. When communications fail, leadership won't. You'll know what to do. She had nodded. What else could she do? Refuse? Show the fear that curled, even then, somewhere deep in her stomach. She had trained herself never to let fear climb into her throat. And yet, as the third day bled into evening, that fear felt different, more pointed, more personal. The first 2 days had been routine, long watches, short sleep, endless equipment checks. Sarah had taken more than her fair share of the observation shifts, because her eyes couldn't rest, because the mountain felt restless, because she didn't want her team to see her unease. She trusted her instincts, and her instincts whispered something is coming. The whispers became louder when picked up chatter. Strange frequencies, encrypted but heavy with urgency. Not just voices, coordination. And Williams, digging in their defenses, had muttered half-jokingly that he was preparing the mountain to bite back if anyone dared climb it. Jokes like that never truly landed. Even the wildlife had gone scarce. No rabbits darting between rocks, no birds cutting through the dawn. The silence was unnatural, like a stage cleared for something violent. She had checked her rifle more times than necessary, wiped the scope, tested the bolt, smoothed her finger over the trigger as if the steel would steady her pulse. Everything functioned perfectly, but machines couldn't ease the gnawing unease inside her. When the third morning returned. That alone set everyone on edge. Generals didn't revisit forward posts without reason, and his face, lined deeper than Sarah remembered, carried weight that didn't belong to battle plans alone. He gathered them, his voice flat with urgency. The enemy offensive was hours away. Hours, and larger than anyone had imagined. What had been an observation mission had just shifted into the last line of communication for the entire valley. If they fell silent, thousands below would be blind. Sarah felt the air leave the group in one collective, quiet exhale. The general stayed with them longer than he needed to, lingering on details already perfected, eyes dragging across each man's face like he wanted to memorize them. Then he pulled Sarah aside again. Higher up the ridge, overlooking the valley that looked deceptively still, spoke not like a commander but like a man trying to leave something unsaid. He pointed out landmarks, escape routes, contingencies that weren't in their orders. His words weren't just tactical, they were weighted heavy, almost farewell. When she promised they'd hold, he nodded, but something in his gaze unsettled her more than any enemy movement could. He left with his convoy, but Sarah's chest carried his shadow long after the rumble of engines faded. That night the valley shifted. She saw it first, the subtle rhythm of shadows below, the way enemy scouts moved like threads weaving a net, reported interference on the radios, static, breaks, like the enemy wasn't just jamming signals but cutting them away piece by piece. The silence felt thicker than the mountain air. And then at 3 in the morning, the valley exploded. Artillery lit the darkness like thunder given form. Flames rippled across the horizon. The ground trembled beneath her stomach as she pressed into the scope and called out coordinates, voice steady against the chaos. Training took over. Her rifle cracked, precise, pulling enemy spotters from the fight. Around her, her team became the thin, invisible thread holding the army below together. Their radio calls guided defensive fire. Their intel saved lives. For 2 hours they held. 2 hours of hell compressed into heartbeats and breathless commands. Until the mortars found them. The first round landed 50 meters off, a warning written in fire. Dirt and stone rained down, clattering against helmets, choking lungs. This wasn't random. They'd been found. "Move," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting sharper than the explosions. Scrambled with his radios, Williams flicked charges into place, Jackson, and slipped into the shadows to set fallback lines. The mountain howled with thunder not born of nature. The second mortar hit closer, and closer, adjusted fire. Someone was watching them, feeding coordinates. The enemy wasn't guessing anymore, they were hunting. Sarah kept calling positions through the storm. The ground shook, ears rang, but her voice stayed steady. Headquarters needs this. Keep feeding them. She couldn't let the chaos strip her of purpose. Not when thousands depended on their thread of signal. Then came the blast. It wasn't like the others. It was closer, angrier. A roar that ripped through stone and sky alike, throwing Sarah against a boulder with bone-rattling force. Silence swallowed her world. Ears numb, body screaming, she blinked against the dust and tried to stand. Shapes moved, voices, shouting into a radio that now only answered with static. Williams pulling at her shoulder, face streaked with ash. Her team scattered, bruised, but alive for now. But something else gnawed at her. A fragment of panicked words cut through the ringing in her ears. Convoy, no contact. He hadn't made it back. The general had disappeared into the same silence, now swallowing their radios. Sarah's gut twisted. The mountain was collapsing into fire, the enemy climbing, their mission on the brink, and the one man who had carried secrets, orders, contingency plans, had vanished into the dark. And still the enemy kept climbing. Do you know the moment when silence feels more terrifying than the explosions that came before it? Sarah did. The mountain seemed to hold its breath after the last blast, dust curling like ghosts in the dark air. She pushed herself upright, coughing, her ears ringing in a hollow void where her team's shouts sounded distant and broken. Shapes moved through the haze, hunched over his radios, hitting dials as if he could force life back into the machine. Williams knelt beside a pack of explosives, blood seeping through his sleeve but his hand steady. Across the debris, Sarah caught glimpses of Jackson and silhouettes waving, cut off by a fresh wall of stone carved from the mountain itself. They were no longer 8, They were fragments. Her chest tightened. Military doctrine demanded unity, stay together, move as one. But the terrain didn't care about doctrine. The mountain had split them. And below, the valley was alive with fire. From her elevated scope, she saw it clearly now. The enemy pouring forward in waves, soldiers spilling from tree lines and ravines, climbing with ropes, advancing in perfect rhythm. The artillery barrage had been nothing but a drumbeat. This was the song of the assault. Sarah pressed her rifle to her shoulder, steady despite the tremor in her breath. She picked targets, a spotter raising binoculars, a soldier planting a marker for mortars, another signaling directions with a glow stick. Her shots cracked the night, precise, lethal, buying minutes for her cut-off team. Each pull of the trigger steadied her heartbeat. Each kill felt like a hand pressed against the bleeding wound of inevitability. Williams shouted behind her, voice straining through the dust. "Charges are ready. We can funnel them, just say the word." But Sarah didn't answer yet. She kept her scope locked. She watched the enemy move like they had studied the mountain for weeks. They knew where cover was. They knew where she'd likely set up. They weren't climbing blind. Someone had handed them the map. And in her gut she knew who. Not dead, not free, taken. Her pulse raced. If the enemy had him, if they pulled every contingency, every line of defense, every buried plan from his memory, the entire valley below was already compromised. The mission wasn't observation anymore. It wasn't survival anymore. It was unraveling something bigger. Slammed a fist against his static-filled radio. "HQ gone, it's like they're cutting us out of the air." His voice cracked, frustration spilling over. "We're ghosts up here, Sarah." Her jaw tightened. "Then we fight like ghosts." The words left her mouth before she realized they were hers. Short, sharp, command. The kind Wood expected her to speak. She turned to Williams. "Blow the first line, not all of them, just enough to stall." He didn't hesitate. A click, a spark, and the mountain answered with fire. Charges hidden along the slope roared, hurling stone and smoke into the climbing enemy. Screams echoed below. A section of the advance collapsed into chaos. For a breath, Sarah allowed herself to feel hope. They had slowed them. But the hope was thin. Through her scope she saw the enemy adjust, pulling back, then splitting into flanking groups. Not reckless, not desperate, calculated. They weren't just climbing, they were hunting. And the ridge was prey. "Signals," Jackson's voice carried faintly across the debris wall, one hand raised in frantic motions. "Low on ammo." His other hand held a rifle angled toward the slope. Muzzle flashes flared around him. He and were holding the far flank alone, shadows against a rising tide. Sarah's stomach twisted. Doctrine screamed, "Regroup, withdraw together." But her eyes saw the truth. The debris wall made it near impossible. To force a path meant exposing all of them to fire, and to leave Jackson and behind. Her teeth ground together. No good choice. Only survival threaded thin through impossible odds. Crawled closer, his voice lowered as if the mountain might overhear. "We can't hold much longer. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they're on us." And then, he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Sarah breathed out slow. Her finger hovered near the trigger again. She tried to drown out the ringing in her ears, the shouting around her, the mountain cracking beneath the weight of war. Her eyes fell on the valley. The fire, the chaos, the endless advancing silhouettes. And her thoughts fell back to his last look, the strange gravity in his eyes, the way he spoke not as if preparing for a fight but preparing her for absence. Did he know? Did he sense his convoy would never reach headquarters, that he would vanish into the silence she now felt choking her throat? The mountain thundered again, closer. Enemy mortars adjusting, zeroing in. Another explosion tore through the ridge, throwing dirt and fire into the air. Williams stumbled, blood streaking his temple, but still managed to trigger another defensive blast, slowing another wave. Sarah's scope swung to the debris field where Jackson and now fought like cornered wolves. Sparks lit their rifles in frantic bursts. And in that chaos, Sarah saw the thing she dreaded, shadows flanking them, cutting off their retreat. No, she whispered, chest tightening. She could leave. She could pull back with and Williams fight through the other side, keep the radios alive. That was the rational choice, the military choice, but every beat of her heart screamed against it. She had promised herself, no one left behind. Her hands gripped the rifle. Through the scope she marked 3 enemy climbers, their rifles raised toward Jackson's position. She squeezed. 1 fell, 2, 3. But for every shadow that fell, more climbed. She licked dust from her lips, breathing shallow, her mind torn between survival and loyalty, between orders and humanity. The mountain didn't wait for her answer. Another blast ripped the ridge, closer this time, collapsing more stone. Dust filled her lungs, her vision. She coughed, wiped her eyes, and through the blur saw the enemy pushing harder, faster, like a tide, sensing its prey weakening. Grabbed her shoulder, shaking her. Sarah, decide now. And she knew this wasn't just a moment of tactics. This was the moment had meant. Leadership when communications failed. Decisions no one else could make. Stay and risk all of them. Leave and bury her promise beneath the mountain. Her chest heaved, her scope steadied, her finger brushed the trigger again. But inside her, something broke and hardened all at once. She whispered to herself, to the dust, to the memory of his voice, "We don't abandon." And she rose into the fire. How many lives could she gamble with one decision? The question echoed in Sarah's mind as her boots pounded against loose rock, the rifle pressed to her chest. Dust stung her throat. The mountain seemed to tilt beneath her as if it, too, wanted to cast her down toward the flames below. Behind her, cursed under his breath, dragging the damaged radios across the rubble like a lifeline already fraying. Williams limped but carried his charges with grim determination, the detonator never leaving his hand. Their eyes looked to her, waiting for her next word, their lives tethered to the choice she had made in a whisper, "We don't abandon." Ahead, Jackson fired in ragged bursts, their rifles flashing like lighthouses in a sea of advancing shadows. They were cut off, the debris wall jagged between them, enemy fire stitching the night around their silhouettes. Sarah dropped to her stomach, scope up, breath stilling. The world narrowed into crosshairs. She found a climber reaching for the ridge, squeezed, sent him tumbling back into darkness, shifted, fired again. Precision became rhythm, rhythm became breath. Her shots carved moments, moments for Jackson to breathe, to reload, to stay alive. But her magazine emptied too quickly, and for every enemy that fell, 2 more pressed forward. "Williams," she barked, "path through the debris, blow us a gap." The medic explosives man didn't hesitate. He crawled to the shattered stone, set his charges with the calm of someone stitching a wound. Sarah covered him, every shot timed between the pounding of her heart. The detonation cracked like the mountain splitting in protest. Rock shattered, dust swallowed them all, and for a heartbeat Sarah wondered if she had buried them instead of saving them. Then through the haze, shapes moved. Jackson stumbled forward, his shoulder bleeding, dragging him with one arm while firing with the other. Their eyes locked with Sarah's through the smoke, fear, exhaustion, and the kind of gratitude words never carried. They were together again, for now. But the enemy knew. The ridge wasn't just a position anymore. It was prey that had resisted too long. Mortar fire shifted closer, bursts chewing into their newly cut path. Rifle shots snapped overhead. Sarah felt the sting of stone fragments cutting her cheek. "Fall back," she ordered, her voice rough. "Controlled, cover fire." They moved as one, fragmented pieces stitched back together by urgency. Williams triggered secondary charges, collapsing stone behind them, choking the paths the enemy tried to climb. Jackson fired with his good arm, grimacing through blood, dragged the radio, muttering prayers in Spanish, moved like a phantom, covering angles no one else could see. and Sarah fought the mountain itself. Every step down the ridge felt like defiance. Her boots slid on gravel, her lungs burned, but her scope stayed ready. She fired, reloaded, fired again. Each enemy who fell bought them seconds. Seconds were the new currency of survival. Yet even in the chaos, her mind refused to silence one thought. He should have been safe by now. His convoy should have reached headquarters, but the radios carried nothing. No confirmation, only static, and broken words the convoy never checked and stabbed at her gut. Had he been ambushed, captured, killed, or worse had he known? His final words to her on the ridge replayed like a haunting. Leadership when communications failed. Hard choices when isolation swallowed orders. Did he say it because he trusted her or because he knew she would be alone? Her chest tightened as she fired again, the recoil shaking through her body. She didn't want to believe the thought forming in the cracks of her exhaustion. That hadn't just vanished. That maybe, somehow, he had been part of the silence now hunting them. The team reached a shallow ravine, the only cover within reach. They collapsed behind stone, breaths ragged, rifles hot. For a moment the enemy fire shifted upward, searching, disoriented by Williams' detonations. Sarah pressed her back against the rock, sweat mixing with dust on her skin. Her hands trembled, but not from fatigue alone. It was the weight of choices stacking higher than the mountain itself. Jackson winced as wrapped a bandage tight around his shoulder. "We should been dead up there," he rasped, eyes locking on Sarah. "You didn't leave us." She didn't answer, she couldn't, because in the silence between his words the other voice whispered again. His voice, his eyes that morning, his absence now. Finally looked up from his broken radio, his face pale beneath streaks of grime. "It's more than jamming. It feels like they're inside the signals. Every frequency I touch, it's like they're waiting for us." His hands shook as he wiped blood from his temple. "It's not just us they know about. They know everything." Sarah's throat tightened, the enemy climbing in perfect rhythm, mortars adjusting with uncanny precision. Their routes anticipated before they even moved. It wasn't random. It was intelligence. It was betrayal. And her chest ached as she shoved the thought down. Not now, survival first, answers later. "Ammo check," she ordered, voice clipped. "We'll hold here, slow them, then move." Clicks of magazines answered, half empty, less than half, enough for one more serious fight maybe. The ground trembled as another mortar struck closer. Dirt rained down, filling their mouths, their eyes. The enemy wouldn't stop. They were being pressed into the jaws of inevitability. Sarah peeked over the stone, scope up. Through the dust she saw the next wave climbing, not desperate, not reckless, steady, confident, as if they already knew the outcome. And in that cold precision, she saw shadow again. Her trigger finger steadied. She whispered to herself, to the mountain, to the ghosts already circling them. "We'll find you. If you're alive, we'll find you. And if you're not," her jaw clenched, eyes narrowing through the scope, "then we'll learn why." The rifle cracked, the night shuddered, and Sarah led her team back into the fire. What did survival even mean when every step led deeper into the unknown? Sarah's boots scraped against loose stone as she led her team downward, the mountain swallowing them in smoke and silence. Behind them, explosions rumbled like a storm refusing to pass. Every detonation Williams triggered carved moments of breathing room, but the enemy always returned, climbing like shadows that never tired. The ravine they followed narrowed into a twisting path, walls jagged and sharp. It was shelter for now, but Sarah knew it could just as easily become a trap. High ground meant death if the enemy claimed it first, and judging by the precision of the artillery earlier, the enemy seemed to anticipate every move. Panted as he half-carried the battered radios. "We're bleeding signals, Sarah. Every channel's compromised. They're inside the air itself." His words carried more than exhaustion. They carried fear. Williams limped, his face drawn tight, but his hands never stopped working. He armed charges as they moved, leaving behind small teeth of fire meant to bite back at their pursuers. Jackson leaned against, shoulder bandaged, his jaw locked in stubborn silence. Sarah moved point, rifle raised, every nerve stretched thin. Her eyes caught every shadow, every glint of moonlight off stone. The valley below flickered with distant artillery bursts, but the mountain around them was alive with silence too heavy to trust. Her thoughts wouldn't still. They never did, not since the blast. His face hovered behind her eyes, the weight in his stare when he spoke of leadership without orders. His convoy's silence wasn't just absence. It was wrong, too wrong. Had he been captured, or worse, had he known? She shook the thought away, forced her eyes back to the trail. Focus on survival, one step at a time, one breath. The path split ahead, a narrow descent into thicker cover, or a winding trail that offered speed but left them exposed to the stars. Sarah raised her hand. The team halted, breaths ragged in the thin air. She whispered, pointing toward the covered descent, "Signals." He twisted the dials, frowning. "Dead here, might as well be buried alive. The open path gives me a chance. A bad one, but a chance." Williams spat blood into the dirt. "Cover safer. Open ground will be fish in a barrel." Arguments pressed like the mountain's weight. Safety or communication, concealment or contact, no option without risk. Sarah closed her eyes for a breath. The silence inside her grew heavy with words. Hard choices when communication fails. She opened her eyes. "We take the open path. We need the signals. Without them, the army below fights blind." Nobody argued. They just adjusted rifles and packs, trusting her to lead them into the light. The trail widened, starlight exposing their silhouettes against jagged stone. Sarah's heart pounded. Each step felt louder than the last. She raised her scope often, scanning, searching for the glint of enemy scopes. And then it came, a crack, the sharp snap of a bullet cutting the night. "Down!" Sarah shouted, throwing herself behind a boulder. Jackson grunted, clutching his bandaged shoulder where the round had grazed deeper, dragged him to cover, teeth clenched. Enemy snipers, positioned exactly where Sarah had feared. Muzzles flashed along the ridge, rounds bit into stone, sparks showering them. The team pressed flat against the dirt, pinned. Williams leaned close, whispering harsh, "We can't sit here, Sarah. They'll zero us." Her scope swung upward. Through the crosshairs she saw them, shadows against starlight, rifles braced, calm and patient. Not reckless infantry, professionals, hunters. Her fingers squeezed. One fell tumbling, another ducked, but more weighted, always more. "Can you reach HQ?" she hissed. He twisted dials, face pale in the starlight. A burst of static, then faint voices, broken, cutting in and out, but enough. "They're holding below, barely, but Sarah," his voice cracked, "still no word on." Her chest clenched. The silence had shape now. It wasn't absence, it was confirmation. Something had happened. But the mountain demanded her attention. She steadied her rifle, firing again, covering Williams as he set a charge beneath a slab of stone. The blast cracked the ridge, collapsing part of the sniper nest above. Dust and screams rolled down like thunder. "Move," she shouted, rising from cover. The team bolted, sprinting along the trail as bullets chased them. Williams limped but pushed. Jackson leaned on, clutched his radio like salvation. Sarah covered the rear, rifle steady, her shots carving seconds for their escape. They plunged into thicker woods where shadows swallowed them whole. For a moment, silence again. Only their breaths, ragged and uneven. Sarah leaned against a tree, chest heaving, sweat stinging her eyes. The night pressed close, but her mind refused rest. Convoy burned into her thoughts. She had seen convoys vanish before, but never like this. Never a general, never someone who had looked her in the eyes and spoken as if he were already gone. Crouched beside her, eyes sharp even in exhaustion. "They're not chasing us blind. They know every turn we make." Looked up from his radio, voice flat. "That's because they know more than they should. Someone fed them, someone high." His eyes flicked to Sarah as if waiting for her to say the name neither wanted to speak. But she didn't, not yet. Instead, she pushed off the tree, rifle raised again. We keep moving. We find lower ground before dawn. Then I find. Williams looked at her sharply. Alone, you'll never. Her glare cut him silent. I have to. If he's alive, he's the reason they're one step ahead. And if he's not, her throat tightened, words breaking before they left her lips. She swallowed hard, forcing them out. Then we need proof. The team said nothing. They just adjusted their gear, their silence an answer she didn't want but needed. The mountain loomed endless around them, every shadow a threat, every sound a warning. But Sarah felt something else in the silence now, not just the enemy. A pull, a tether leading her toward the place had vanished. She didn't know what she'd find, a grave, a trap, or a truth she wasn't ready to face. But she knew she would go. Because sometimes survival wasn't just about living. It was about finding the answer to silence. Why was she the only one who felt the pull stronger than the fear? The mountain had quieted, but it wasn't peace. It was the pause between storms, the kind of silence that pressed against skin and made the air itself feel dangerous. Sarah crouched in the hollow of a pine thicket, her team collapsed in exhaustion around her. Jackson's bandaged shoulder glistened with blood, kept his eyes scanning even as his body shook with fatigue, muttered to his broken radio like a priest with a dying prayer. And Williams sat with his back against stone, explosives at his side like an extension of his heartbeat. They were alive, for now, but survival felt borrowed, as if the mountain hadn't decided yet whether to keep them. Sarah couldn't sleep, not with shadow crawling through her thoughts. She could almost hear his voice, the calm weight when he'd told her that sometimes leadership meant making choices no one else could. Choices that broke you but kept others alive. Her hand brushed the cold steel of her rifle. She had already made one impossible choice, refusing to abandon Jackson, but now another pressed closer. The team needed her. The valley below needed them. But silence gnawed like a wound. If he had been captured, every second meant more lives lost. Every minute meant the enemy pressing further, guided by stolen knowledge. And if he had been killed, then proof mattered. His fate mattered. Truth mattered. She rose quietly, boots pressing into pine needles without a sound. His head lifted, sharp even in fatigue. His eyes caught hers. No words, just a look he knew. Sarah leaned close, her whisper barely breaking the night. Keep them alive. Find signal, Williams sets traps, Jackson rests. At dawn, head for the fallback site. Frowned and you. Her jaw tightened, she forced her voice steady. I'm finding. Stirred, his voice cracking. Sarah, that's suicide, alone. She shook her head. Not suicide, purpose. If they have him, he's the reason they've outmaneuvered us every step. And if he's gone, her chest constricted, the words catching like barbed wire. Then I need to know. Silence heavy, resigned. No one argued again. Maybe because they understood. Maybe because they had no strength left. Finally gave a single nod. Then come back. Don't make us the ones left behind. Sarah's throat tightened. She touched his shoulder, then turned, slipping into the darkness with nothing but her rifle, a sidearm, a knife, and the mountain ahead. Alone. The night air bit sharper once distance grew between her and the team. She moved low, weaving between stone and shadow, her every sense sharpened. Without their footsteps behind her, every sound was her own. Every branch snapped beneath her weight felt like a signal flare to the enemy. She followed the faint scars of the convoy's passage, tire tracks pressed into the dirt, snapped branches along the slope. Too neat, too fresh. Vehicles had passed here, but they hadn't made it down. Further along, the trail changed. Burn marks the ground, black smoke stains clawed at tree trunks. Sarah crouched, fingers brushing ash still clinging to the earth. Her chest tightened. She pressed forward, every step heavier. Then she saw it. The first wreck lay half-hidden in a ravine, its steel husk blackened and bent. A convoy vehicle, still smoking faintly. Bullet holes stitched its side like cruel handwriting. Sarah's heart hammered. She approached slowly, rifle raised, scanning every angle. No bodies, no blood pools that marked final stands. Just scattered gear, helmets, packs, and drag marks leading away from the wreckage. Her stomach twisted. Survivors pulled away, not killed. Yep. She crouched, tracing the grooves in the dirt. Boot prints, many, moving with precision, not panic. The enemy had known exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an ambush of chance. It was a capture. Sarah's throat felt dry. She swallowed hard, pushing forward, following the trail deeper into the mountain. Her mind raced even as her body moved like muscle memory. If was alive, the enemy had more than just his presence. They had his knowledge, his strategies, his plans. Every choice she made now, every bullet, every step, might already be anticipated because of him. And yet beneath that cold calculation, something else gnawed at her. Memory. The way he'd looked at her, voice steady but heavy with something unspoken. As if he had already accepted being taken. As if he had walked toward it willingly. Her breath caught, she forced the thought away. Focus, survive. The trail led toward a darker line of cliffs, the jagged mouth of old mining tunnels yawning like a scar in the mountain. Abandoned for decades. Perfect for concealment. Perfect for a prison. Sarah froze in the shadow of a ridge, raising her scope. Through the glass she saw them, enemy guards moving with quiet discipline around the cave entrance. Not raw recruits. These were professionals. Their rifles were steady, their eyes never lingered. This was no temporary camp. It was a command post. And there, through the scope, she saw him. Escorted between two guards, his hands bound but walking steady. His face pale in the dim light, but alive. Sarah's breath hitched. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. Relief warred with dread inside her chest. He was alive, but his survival was already killing others. Because if he was here, speaking, sharing even under duress, then every life below was a thread unraveling. Sarah pulled back behind the ridge, heart hammering. She pressed her forehead against the rifle stock, forcing her breath slow. Options flickered in her mind: report, wait, act. Protocol screamed one thing. Her instincts whispered another. Radio contact was gone. Reinforcements would never come in time. Every hour remained here, the valley bled. Her jaw clenched, her pulse steadied. She knew what she had to do. Alone against 20 armed men inside a fortified cave, she would plan, she would wait, and when the window opened she would take it. Not because orders told her to. Not because survival demanded it. But because sometimes silence was a worse death than bullets. And she would not let silence bury them all. How long could one heart hold its breath? Sarah lay prone against the ridge, her cheek pressed to the cold dirt, rifle cradled like an extension of her body. Through her scope, the cave complex unfolded in fragments of movement. Guards packing with practiced rhythm, shadows shifting inside, the faint glow of lanterns that betrayed depth beyond the mouth of stone. The enemy wasn't sloppy. Their security pattern was layered, a ring of sentries outside, roaming pairs along and within the cave mouth, silhouettes crossing back and forth like the steady pulse of an artery. No wasted movement, no gaps wide enough to slip through without consequence. Her breath fogged against the scope. She pulled back, letting her eyes rest, listening to the night. Crickets hummed somewhere far away. The faint crack of distant gunfire echoed from the valley, a reminder that while she lay here frozen, men below were dying in a battle increasingly directed by the intelligence pulled from. She squeezed her eyes shut. Focus. You can't fight everyone. You can't save everyone. Just do this. Her instincts told her the cave was more than a prison. She'd seen officers moving in and out, carrying maps and satchels. Guards deferring to men with radios slung across their chests. This wasn't just where they held. It was a command post, A nerve center, maybe the nerve center. Destroying it would matter, but rescuing him mattered more. Because he wasn't just a man. He was the reason the enemy seemed to anticipate every move. He was the breach in their walls, the silence in their radios, the ghost in their every failed step. And Sarah couldn't ignore the personal weight either. She could still see him standing with her on the ridge, his voice low, his gaze heavy. She could still hear the words, "When communications fail, leadership won't." She couldn't shake the suspicion that he'd known this was coming, that he'd walked willingly into fate's jaws. But whether he'd chosen or been dragged, he was here, and she was here. The mountain had narrowed her world to this. She exhaled, raised her scope again. Patience, precision, that's what snipers lived on. The first thing she mapped was rhythm. She tracked the outer ring of guards, noting the timing of their turns, the pauses when they met, the seconds of overlap where blind spots formed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. She scribbled notes in the dirt with her knife, lines and arrows that meant life or death. Next, she studied the cave itself. Guards near the mouth rotated in threes, but one lingered longer each cycle, distracted by conversation. A weak link. She underlined his mark in the dirt. Deeper inside, harder to see, shadows of activity. Men in uniforms not local, their posture sharper, their movements efficient. Officers, intelligence staff. This was no holding cell. It was a brain, and was its hostage. Her stomach tightened. Every hour they kept him, the army below lost ground. She needed to move soon. But rushing would be death. Sarah shifted her focus inward, forcing herself to run mental rehearsals. Crawl here. Time the guard's turn. Knife to throat, silence. Move body, pause, wait. Next gap. She replayed each scenario until the path etched itself into muscle memory. Her mind betrayed her, though, slipping images into the plan. Bound, his face pale, his lips moving under questioning. What was he saying? What had he already given them? Would saving him even matter if the damage was already done? The thought gnawed. She pushed it down, but it returned like a blade between ribs. What if his silence wasn't forced? What if it was chosen? Her chest clenched. She pulled the rifle close, grounding herself in steel and weight. This wasn't the time. She needed clarity, not questions. The hours crawled. Shadows shifted with the moon. At one point, a guard lit a cigarette at the cave mouth, the ember burning like an invitation. Sarah steadied her crosshairs on his chest, finger hovering. One squeeze and the pattern would break, but she didn't fire, not yet. Instead, she waited. For the moment when the enemy would slip, not in vigilance but in rhythm. She knew from experience, no guard rotation was perfect. Fatigue, distraction, routine, they all carved windows. She just had to find one. By dawn, she had it. A gap less than 2 minutes long, but enough. It came when the outer ring's patrol met at the far side of the ridge, their overlap lingering longer than necessary in idle talk. Simultaneously, the inner trio rotated, leaving the distracted smoker alone at the mouth for a precious 30 seconds. A gap where shadows aligned, where silence could be cut with a knife instead of bullets. Sarah's chest swelled with a strange mix of fear and calm. Snipers lived for precision, patience until the exact moment mattered, then action, swift, decisive. Her hands checked gear one last time. Sidearm, knife, 2 magazines, rope, no more, no less. She whispered to herself, voice nearly lost to the wind, "This is it." For a moment, she let herself think of her team, scattered in the mountain silence, clinging to survival, trusting her. She thought of his eyes when he'd said, "Come back." And she thought of bound, silent, waiting. Or not waiting at all. Her chest tightened again. She forced a breath, pushed the thought away. Then she slid forward, body low, merging with the dirt and shadow. Each step was measured, each pause calculated. The world narrowed to heartbeat, breath, and the rhythm of enemy boots crunching against gravel. Her pulse thundered, but her movements were steady. The first guard turned his head. She froze, pressed flat against stone, breath caught. A second passed. Another. Then his eyes shifted away, his boots carrying him past. Sarah moved again, silent as falling ash. The cave mouth loomed closer. The smoker leaned against the stone, ember glowing faint against the gray light of dawn. His rifle slung low, his guard dulled by routine. Sarah's knife whispered from its sheath. 3 steps, a hand to his mouth. The blade slid beneath his jaw, swift, precise. His body sagged. She caught him, eased him to the ground, extinguished the ember in the dirt. Silence reclaimed the space. One gap closed, another opened. She slipped into the cave. The air inside was damp, cold, smelling of oil and smoke. Shadows stretched long, punctuated by lantern light that flickered against walls. Voices echoed deeper within, calm, measured, speaking in a language Sarah couldn't fully catch. Officers at work. Interrogators. Her chest tightened. She gripped her pistol, moving low, every step slow, every shadow a threat. And then, deeper still, she heard it. Not enemy voices, not commands, but a cough, rough, familiar. Her throat constricted. Her eyes burned. She pressed against the cave wall, her mind split between the pounding of her heart and the silence of her breath. He was alive. But so were the men around him. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the truth settle heavy. She couldn't save him without killing them. She couldn't kill them without risk. And she couldn't risk without accepting that this wasn't just a rescue. It was war compressed into stone. Her grip tightened on the pistol. Her knife glinted faintly in the lantern light. This was the moment before the storm. And Sarah knew storms didn't wait forever. Why did her hands feel so steady when her heart wanted to tear itself apart? Sarah pressed deeper into the cave, her pistol raised, every sense alive with danger. Lantern light painted the stone walls in trembling shadows. Voices murmured ahead, calm, deliberate, the cadence of men who believed themselves untouchable. She inched forward. The air grew heavier, damp with smoke and sweat. She hugged the wall, careful to let the noise of her boots disappear into the drip of water from the ceiling. Then she saw them. The chamber opened wide, lit by a cluster of lanterns hanging from steel hooks. A crude table held maps and radios, enemy officers leaning over them. Guards lined the walls, rifles slung, their postures too relaxed. Confidence had made them careless. And in the center, bound to a chair, head bowed, shoulders squared despite the ropes, sat General. Sarah's throat closed. He looked thinner, older somehow, but alive. Alive and surrounded by men who saw him as both prize and weapon. Her pulse surged. Training took over. She raised her pistol, sighted the guard nearest to. The distance was close, the angle perfect. She inhaled, exhaled, squeezed. The guard jerked, slumping sideways before his body even registered the shot. The muffled crack echoed, too soft to pierce the outer cave, but loud enough to snap the chamber's silence. The second guard turned. Sarah's second shot dropped him before his shout could rise. His head lifted sharply, eyes locking onto hers. Recognition flickered, quick and sharp. He shifted in his chair, bracing, ready. "Sarah," he rasped. No shock, no disbelief, just the steady voice of a man who had expected her. The third guard lunged. Sarah's knife flashed, a clean arc across his throat, his body collapsing with a wet gasp. The room erupted. Shouts in a language she didn't need to understand. Boots scraped. Rifles raised. Sarah dove, rolling toward the table. She fired twice, each shot cutting through the chest of an officer reaching for a weapon. Twisted, using the sudden chaos to tip his chair sideways, buying her seconds. "Hold still," she snapped, knife slashing through the ropes. His wrists came free, raw with rope burns. He surged up, grabbing the fallen guard's rifle. The sound of his first shot cracked like thunder, steady, practiced. The years hadn't dulled him. Together they moved as if rehearsed. Sarah cut down two more guards with precise pistol shots, providing cover fire with short, controlled bursts. Their eyes met between movements, a wordless exchange, part trust, part desperation. But the enemy wasn't untrained. More soldiers surged from the tunnel mouths, rifles already raised. Bullets sparked off stone, ricocheting into the chamber. Sarah shoved toward cover, her shoulder slamming into a crate as rounds tore through the air where she'd been a second before. She reloaded, hands working by instinct. One clip, then another. Shots snapped, guards dropped, but more filled the space. "Move," she barked, vaulting the crate, her knife flashing in one hand, pistol in the other. She plunged the blade into a soldier's side, fired into another's chest, spun, ducked. Covered her flank, his rifle spitting fire with disciplined rhythm. The chamber became a storm of chaos. Shouts, gunfire, the metallic ring of steel striking stone, the acrid sting of smoke and blood. Sarah's world narrowed to survival. Target, fire, move, cover. Each second stretched, her body moving faster than thought. And then the echo of footsteps behind, more reinforcements, the cave swallowing them whole. "We don't have time," roared voice hoarse but steady. Sarah's eyes flicked to the maps scattered across the table. Enemy plans, communication codes, proof of how deep the breach ran. She swept her arm, grabbing what she could, shoving papers into her vest even as bullets ripped the air. "This isn't just about you anymore." His eyes flashed, sharp even through fatigue. He gave a single nod, then fired another burst, cutting down two soldiers pressing too close. The chamber was collapsing into chaos. They couldn't hold it. "Go," Sarah shouted. They moved together, sprinting toward the nearest tunnel. Enemy fire chased them, sparks raining from the stone walls. Sarah fired blindly behind her, the echo deafening. Kept pace, his breathing heavy but his stride unbroken. The tunnel twisted, dark and narrow. Shadows moved ahead. Sarah dropped to a knee, firing twice. Both shadows fell, leapt over them, dragging her forward. Their escape wasn't silent. The entire complex was awake now, guards pouring from every passage, shouting, searching. But the mountain stone walls worked both ways. Every echo masked their exact position. Every shot confused the chase. They burst from the cave mouth into the pale light of dawn. Sarah blinked, eyes stinging. The world outside felt blinding after the cave's darkness. "Cover left," barked. Sarah swung her rifle, cutting down two sentries scrambling for cover. Fired right, his shots sharp, precise. They broke through the outer ring, sprinting across open ground, lungs burning. The ridge loomed ahead, their only cover. Beyond it, forest, shadow, the possibility of survival. But behind them the cave vomited soldiers. Dozens. Shouts, boots pounding, rifles cracking. "Run," Sarah snarled, grabbing his arm. He stumbled but kept pace, his jaw tight, his eyes alive with something she hadn't seen before, something between shame and determination. Bullets tore the ground at their heels. One grazed Sarah's sleeve, burning hot against her skin. Another shattered stone beside his head, dust blinding them both. They dove behind the ridge, gasping. Sarah raised her scope, fired into the cluster pouring from the cave. Two fell. A third staggered, but it was endless. Grabbed her shoulder. "We can't hold here, keep moving." She nodded, forcing her breath steady. They scrambled down the slope, sliding on loose rock, trees looming closer. Cover, concealment, survival. And yet, even as they fled, Sarah's mind caught on the look in his eyes. Not just relief, not just determination, something darker, something heavier. Something like a man carrying more than the weight of his own survival. She didn't ask, not yet. The forest swallowed them, and for now, all that mattered was that they were alive. Alive but hunted. What did it mean to be free when the hunt never stopped? Sarah's lungs burned as she tore through the tree line, boots sinking into soil softer than the mountain rock. The forest swallowed them in green shadows, but it also carried new dangers, roots waiting to trip them, branches snapping like signals to the enemy chasing behind. Gunfire cracked from the ridge above, bullets slicing leaves overhead. Sarah ducked, dragging low. Bark splintered around them. They pushed deeper into the woods, every step a gamble between speed and silence. "Keep moving," she hissed, breath sharp. Nodded, his jaw tight, rifle clutched in bruised hands. He kept up, but Sarah noticed the strain, the slight stagger when the beads of sweat that weren't just exertion. His time in captivity had carved weakness into him, no matter how steady he pretended to be. Behind them, voices echoed, dozens, maybe more. The enemy hadn't given up. They wouldn't. Not once capture had been their key advantage. Not when losing him now meant bleeding that advantage away. Sarah stopped briefly in a hollow, kneeling to study the ground. Tracks crisscrossed everywhere, theirs the enemy. She knew pursuit tactics. The enemy would split, circle, box them in. If she kept to predictable routes, they'd be trapped. She drew a quick breath, forcing calm. "We veer east, through the riverbed." Glanced at her, surprised. "That'll slow us." "Better wet than dead," she snapped, already moving. They reached the dry riverbed minutes later, its stones loose beneath their boots. Their tracks scattered in every direction, buying them time. Sarah crouched to check her rifle, wiping grit from the scope. Leaned against a boulder, chest heaving, his face drawn pale. "You should left me," he muttered. Sarah froze, her eyes snapping to him. "Don't say that." He gave a bitter half-smile. "You risked your team, risked yourself, for me. You think it was worth it." Her jaw clenched. "You're the general, they had you, that made you the war." His gaze dropped, shadows hiding his expression. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Then he said softly, "They didn't need to break me. They already knew too much." The words cut sharper than any bullet. Sarah's breath caught. "What do you mean?" His eyes lifted, tired and heavy. "There's a leak, higher than me. They knew my route, my timing, every protocol. My capture was planned weeks before I stepped on that convoy. They wanted me alive because it looked like victory, but the real damage was already done." Sarah's stomach twisted. It wasn't just, it was deeper, buried in their own command. Before she could answer, a shout echoed from behind. The enemy had found their trail again. "Go," she ordered, pulling forward. They ran, through the riverbed into thicker woods, over ridges that clawed at their legs. Williams' explosions rumbled faintly somewhere far off. Her team was still fighting their own battles. Sarah forced herself not to dwell on whether she'd see them again. One mission at a time. The forest thinned as dawn stretched higher, shafts of light spearing through the canopy. Sarah slowed, crouching low, scanning ahead. Open ground, dangerous. Sank to one knee, sweat dripping, his hands trembling slightly on the rifle. He shook his head, frustration burning in his eyes. "I'm slowing you down." Sarah crouched in front of him, gripping his shoulder hard. "Then I'll slow too, but you don't quit, not here, not now." For a second his gaze softened. He gave the smallest nod. Gunfire burst behind them, closer now. Sarah's gut tightened. They sprinted across the clearing, bullets snapping at their heels. She fired over her shoulder, dropping two shapes, then dove into another thicket. Her ammo was thinning, 2 magazines left. Was half spent, every bullet became a decision. Hours passed like years compressed into minutes. The pursuit didn't relent. Sometimes the shouts grew distant, sometimes near. They doubled back, cut through ravines, crawled through brush until their hands bled. Still, the enemy hunted, drawn by the prize represented. Finally, as the sun climbed high, Sarah spotted it, smoke trails in the distance. Not enemy smoke, artillery patterns she recognized, friendly lines. Relief surged, sharp and painful, they were close. But so were the enemy. Shouts erupted to their left. Shapes burst through the trees, rifles raised. Sarah shoved down, returning fire. Her shots cracked, each one precise, 2 enemies falling before the rest dove for cover. "Move," she snapped, firing until her magazine clicked empty. She slammed another in, breath ragged. They stumbled downhill toward the smoke. The forest grew thinner, the sounds of artillery clearer, friendly, alive. Then the crack of a sniper rifle split the air. The round hissed past Sarah's ear, close enough to burn. Another followed, striking the tree beside her. They hit the ground. Sarah scanned, eyes sharp. There on the ridge, the glint of a scope. She steadied her rifle, exhaled, and fired. The glint vanished. Grabbed her arm, hauling her up. Go, go. They broke from the trees into contested ground. Dirt torn by shells, craters scattered like open wounds. Smoke hung thick. For a moment, Sarah couldn't tell whose lines they were entering. Then she saw them, helmets, familiar patterns, rifles raised but cautious. Friendly. She lifted her hand, shouting hoarsely, "Friendly, friendly." The patrol froze, then one soldier stepped forward, weapon lowering. His eyes widened. "General." Sarah staggered forward, nearly dragging with her. Relief surged, heavy and dangerous. The patrol rushed them, pulling into their circle, voices flooding the air. Shock, recognition, urgency. Sarah dropped to one knee, chest heaving, rifle slipping from her grasp. The world swayed, exhaustion pressing like a weight. But she forced herself to stay alert, scanning the tree line, watching for the enemy who still hunted. Was already speaking, his voice weak but steady, recounting what he'd overheard, what he'd seen. Plans, movements, the leak. Sarah's ears caught fragments. Infiltrated command, weeks in planning, communication protocols compromised. Each word confirmed what she'd feared. Wasn't the source of their undoing. He was the proof of how deep the breach ran. Her chest tightened. She had risked everything for him. And now she knew the truth. His capture had been a symptom, not the disease. The patrol guided them back, deeper into friendly lines. Sarah stumbled, her body aching, her mind raw. Relief didn't come, not fully. The mission wasn't finished. It never would be, not with betrayal buried high above her reach. But was alive. Her team, if luck held, still fighting. And the truth had been pulled from silence, however broken. As the lines of soldiers thickened, as the safety of numbers closed around her, Sarah finally let herself sink against the dirt. Her rifle lay heavy at her side, her breath ragged, her body trembling from exhaustion she'd never admit. She thought of the mountain, of the silence between blasts, of the promise she had whispered, "We don't abandon." She had kept it at a cost, but she had kept it. And in the quiet that followed, Sarah understood something had once tried to tell her, that sometimes survival wasn't about strength, or orders, or even victory. Sometimes survival was simply refusing to let silence have the last word. Because dignity didn't speak. It acted.